Hi there and welcome to Impact Talks. Today we have a guest that I am incredibly interested in. He has a great history. He is the founding chief executive of TechNation. Among other roles, he also holds he's a member at the Digital Euro Board from the World Economic Forum, and he's a board member at the Barbican Center. But Gerard, please introduce yourself. Tell the people where they might know you from and what you do.
Sure. Lava, great to see you. This is fantastic. Thanks for the setup and everything. So yes, my name is Gerard Grech. I'm the founding chief executive of TechNation. TechNation is a growth platform for scale-ups, tech scale-ups who are clearly growing, and we provide them with coaching, content, and community to help them with their growth and make sure that their path to success is as smooth as possible. We're based in the UK.
The good thing of that platform is actually that it sounds much smaller than what it is. From our research, I remember seeing that the Prime Minister announced you guys, and that you've grown and are headed towards £1 billion in impact, £1 billion in impact by 2022. Please elaborate a little bit more about the inception, how you were involved, what you guys exactly do, and how come you're all growing so hard.
Yeah, I mean it's great to kind of remind me of that. I think at this point we've now been lucky enough to have worked with about 700 companies. These are UK-based tech businesses, and who have collectively raised about $20 billion in the last 7 years, mainly through venture capital, some on the public markets. And yes, we're on track to deliver about $1 billion of GVA. This is gross value add. This is one of the impact measurements that governments tend to track. And that's really just our contribution to the UK economy and how we ensure that we help companies grow faster. And that's really our mantra is, we exist to help fuel growth of these companies. So we do this through a number of ways, but one of the core ways we do it in is through our growth program. So this is like a 6 month, typically 6 months in length, and we bring a cohort of companies selected through our judging panel, and we bring them together and we go through a number of modules from how to hire your first board member, how to hire your chair, how to expand into international markets, how to hire your first COO, should you need one, at what point do you need one. So real practical tips and advice. But the one thing that really drives the value of this is the fact that we bring some of the very best companies together. And so there's a lot of peer-to-peer engagement that we encourage and facilitate. And so that's where things are right now. We also publish a lot of reports, a lot of insights on the state of UK tech. We're also now expanding internationally with a pilot in Southeast Asia. We also have panels. These are sort of panels where we bring institutional bodies like the Financial Conduct Authority and the big banks alongside fintech entrepreneurs who see the world slightly differently. And I think these panels are very helpful in shaping policy. We're not a lobbying organization, but we do help shape policy through data that we bring in. And so we run one for fintech and one for law tech, where we see a lot of exponential growth in that area just because of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then we have an online academy as well. So we built an online academy with Cambridge University Judge Business School and University College London. And really here, there are 89 courses on starting and growing a digital business. It's completely free of charge. And that's where we bring in people who've actually built companies, sharing their knowledge and wisdom on video. And it's really done on your terms. And so, yeah, that's going really well, especially during the pandemic. Right now, we're seeing a lot of people actually doing these courses and completing them on their own terms. And we also have an entrepreneur engagement network across the country in the UK. So we have people who are kind of engaging with founders and scaling leadership teams to help them with their challenges as they continue growing and scaling. So I've probably missed something else, but that, yeah, we cover a number of things. And to your question earlier about how we first started out, the organization has evolved a number of times, really in line with market changes. It started out actually as an initiative, first and foremost, by the then Prime Minister David Cameron, as an initiative within a government department. And then in 2014, it was taken out of government. And at the time, actually, it was very much an agency, an organization or initiative focused on a cluster, a geographical cluster in the eastern part of London called Silicon Roundabout, or to its real name, Shoreditch. And there was a real surge in growth after the last financial crisis, where you found cheap offices to rent, and there was a lot of exciting stuff buzzing and building up. And so the then Prime Minister David Cameron actually just decided to shine a light on it and just accelerate its growth and be a conduit into government so that it could help shape policy as much as possible. And then in 2014, when I came in as CEO, it was then called Tech City UK, and took it out of government as a separate agency, and really sort of at that point started to really focus on entrepreneurs and scaling leadership teams and through programs. And we started in London and then quickly spread across the country. And then, as you rightly said, some of our funding along the way got announced in 2017 by the then Prime Minister Theresa May, and also our Chancellor. And yes, we've been on a huge growth journey. We've actually been a scale up ourselves. We really started out as a startup and now have scaled ourselves.
So many questions pop up, from the universities you collaborate with to maybe I want to focus considering the show. Can you share maybe some stories of some famous startups that went through, how you were involved, and what is it exactly that you do? Because I've been traveling to a lot of conferences before everything, of course, changed. And every time there is a government initiative that is trying to help, and somehow it always kind of falls short. It's pretty great as a boost, but it usually doesn't really contribute to the growth. It seems to me like you guys really figured it out by involving the whole ecosystem. So could you maybe give like an example of a startup that went through the program, and the story of like what exactly happened and what the practical benefits were?
Sure. Yes, certainly can. And one other thing that I forgot to mention, Lava, is the fact that we run a visa scheme as well for founding teams that want to come to the UK and start their own business here, or also for employees that are looking to join a growing scale up. So we run that as well. And that's to your point about it's making sure that you're putting in services and support in place that can help ecosystem development. And ecosystem development really kind of covers lots of things. You have to be able to really put things together, connect the dots, so to speak, that makes the life of an entrepreneur and their scaling team as frictionless as possible. From policy shaping to support programs like the one I mentioned earlier. And really, to take you through an example, I mean, yeah, we've had several companies go through our programs. Now, clearly, those companies have not been successful because of our programs, but that we've contributed to their growth in the best way that we could. And one of the best ways is just facilitating that engagement to be among their peers, where they're going through similar scaling challenges, and to be able to have a community where they can talk to other people in a trusted environment, in a curated environment, and not be judged and feel completely safe. And obviously, as you can imagine, you're an entrepreneur yourself. Congratulations on the growth you've seen in your business, but you probably are very likely to trust another entrepreneur more so than probably a consultancy. And that's just the way things are. And we noted that very early on, which led to our initial program called Future 50. These were 50 of the fastest growing companies. And we ensured that we supported them in every way. And that led to a gap that we spotted early in the market, which is this, obviously when you start a business, you have early market traction, but it's not until you get to the scaling stage that you start to grow and need growth capital. And we found that there was a real gap in the market at this stage where you are at about 10 to 20 employees, about to jump to about a 50 to 100. And that is it's a very fragile space, because we all know the stats. Over 75% of businesses pretty much don't make it within the first 5 years. And in fact, only 1 or 2% actually become, a unicorn. In fact, there's one stat out there that says that it takes about 500 startups to create a unicorn. So we disproportionately focus our attention on that very fragile space where it's either make or break. And that's where we focus in on from a value standpoint. But companies you may have heard of, your audience may have heard of, that have gone through some of our programs include Revolut, Farfetched, Zoopla, Just Eat, Deliveroo. So these are some of the companies, and clearly one recent company called Bloom and Wild, which does online deliveries of flowers, believe it or not. They came through Upscale. One of our programs is called Upscale. They came through Upscale 1 in 2016, and then went through Future 57 in 2017, and they just closed around about over 100 million recently, just a couple of days ago. And Deliveroo is kind of just secured another huge round. It now has a strategic partnership and investor with Amazon. So we're now seeing all that fruition that we saw, all that exciting stuff that we saw, 7 or 8 years ago in London and the UK as a whole, is really kind of grown quite significantly. And now we see unicorns not only in London, but in Manchester and Edinburgh and Bristol and Cambridge and Oxford. And 2020 was another record high in terms of investment secured. And the UK secured more investment than the whole of Europe put together, despite the challenging things like COVID and Brexit and everything else.
Maybe that's something that always pops up that I'm incredibly interested in, to hear the perspective from your side. So I see a ton of lists always pop up, like the Fortune 500, the Fast 50, or whatever. So don't you feel like sometimes you're missing out by helping other startups, in that you focus on 50? I'm assuming for like 6 months, a year, a quarter. What happens to the other ones that want support as well?
And so that's a very good question. So when you look at the statistics, there's research out there that shows that it's the 6% that go on to create 90% of the jobs. And so it is a very delicate balance, because you clearly want to encourage and foster as much innovation as possible across the whole country, right? We believe that talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And in that regard, however, you need to make sure that you foster an environment where you are building up role models, and that people can look up to and say, if they can do it, I can do it too. And really, we're here to facilitate their growth, so they can be they can be local leaders who the local population look up to, and say, well, if they can do it here, I can do it myself. And that's very important. Having role models of success are very important in encouraging aspiration in up and coming or budding entrepreneurs. And that's where the academy comes in. So the academy, in fact, actually, the way we do this is that we have programs supporting people at different stages. We've now built new programs that look at sectors as well, like fintech, applied artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And the latest one is net zero, which is really focusing on climate change. But just to answer your point about the thing about making sure that you're spreading the net as widely as possible, but then you have to make sure that you have programs in place that enable companies to grow and ensure that 6% go on to create 90% of the jobs. Now, clearly, we want that 6% to be 7% and 8% and 9%. It takes time. And the academy is for anybody that wants to start a business or pretty much scale a business. So that is available to anybody as well at the same time. And then, we've had someone who was a night shift worker at Tesco. Tesco is a supermarket here in the UK, and they did most of the courses online. He then decided to start a fintech business. He then joined our early stage program called Founders Network, kind of started collaborating and connecting with other people in the area. And that's how he got going. And, before that, he was a night shift packer at a supermarket. So we do believe that entrepreneurship, especially tech entrepreneurship now, is a great leveler. Anybody can be an entrepreneur, but it's probably not for everybody. And that's a starting principle that we're very honest about, unashamedly. And people have to recognize that, because obviously that's important.
Okay, so multiple questions popped up. I want to cover the societal challenges now and how that affects this, but a bit later. The first thing I want to cover is a small detail that you mentioned. You said there's a fragile point, which I completely resonated with, after 20 people up to like the growth stage of 50 to 100. I've gone through that and it's so true, but I would like to hear, could you maybe explain what you mean? After the 20 people, what is it that happens? Why is it fragile, and what happens there?
I guess, look, there are many theories and research on this, and I'm sure your audience will be very well versed in how they see the world on this front. And there are many books published. I guess I tried to kind of deconstruct it and look at two stages. The first stage is innovating, and the second stage is scaling. And with that, and when you're scaling, then it's about unit economics, especially from a venture capitalist point of view. It's like, how can you make this thing faster, cheaper, better, as quickly as possible, and scale it as quickly as possible. In the innovating phase, things are it's not necessarily process driven. It is passion, it's spirited conversations that you have with your team. It is also, we all know that sometimes the team that you have at the beginning is not the team you have at 500 or 1,000. In some instances it is. And so what tends to happen is that when you've got market traction and you've got, you're at MVP, and then you move on from MVP, and you're having market traction and something is really scaling, you then have to shift gears. You have to bring in talented people who really know how to put in frameworks into the business that can really truly scale. Especially if you start out in an office space in one room, you're all around a round table, and you move on to then having teams and departments and ensuring that you're still maintaining the culture that you want to see, that you first had when you first started out on a kitchen table, possibly in an apartment. So those are the tricky things. It's like, how do you maintain that thing? How do you find the right people that really understand your business and the mission that you're on? Because it's not, it's quite a commitment, especially when it's long hours and a lot of grit and sweat. And you can't, what gets you to the next point isn't what got you there, what that's going to get you to the next point. And understand that, and understanding that as a human being, as a leader, and trying to make sure that you have enough self-awareness to know that, hey, what got me here and made our company successful might not necessarily be the case 100%, and what's going to make us successful with 100 people. And so those honest conversations, and there's a lot been written up about this. One book I recommend is I think it's called Powerful, by the chief people officer at Netflix. She's now left, Kim. She writes a lot about how that transition, that delicate period where you have to have those honest conversations about what's not working and what's working, and just focusing on what's working, and then being honest as a team. And also, if you then start to have satellite operations in different markets or different geographies, and by the time you get to 100, you have different challenges. The frameworks that you put in when you were 50 people, do they still work? And then you get to 250. And this is all what we try and do, is capture all this information as much as possible. And obviously every business is different, every sector is different, right? We understand that. But the more we capture this information and share it, it makes it less daunting for the next generation of entrepreneurs to go through this. And we've actually published a book, if anybody's interested, called Upscale. It really goes through various chapters. Actually, there are three main headings. One is people, two is strategy, and three is fundraising. I mean, these are the three constituents that you need to get right, especially at that early stage, in order to be able to create a very successful scale up.
Maybe a question that pops up for me is, I've always seen two different types of entrepreneurs. Ones that go for the whole VC path, fundraising, everything. But then there are these entrepreneurs that just make money, to put it bluntly. Like they just need more clients. They need to put more fire. Sometimes an investment is to put more fire, get in more clients and everything. Do you feel in the last years there's been a disproportionate amount of entrepreneurs who are going for fundraising and are not thinking about getting clients?
I mean, that's a valid observation. I don't have specific research to show that specifically, but yes, I guess there is a structural dynamic shift going on in the fact that digital technology is transforming industries, and therefore some of the best ways to transform industries is to back talented people with great visions of how they want to see the world that's different to the one they're living in. And so there's a lot to be said about that. There's a lot to be said about how things progress and how change happens. And so we do believe that we're kind of backing the change makers of the future. And yes, ambition, talented teams obviously are ambitious. Ambition doesn't mean needing to raise funding. Absolutely not. We have many companies in our programs that are not venture backed, and that's okay. There's nothing to say that you need to be venture backed at all.
But that's actually a genuine question. Are they missing out on something? Could they grow faster if they had venture backing?
Well, it depends on the ambition of the team, right? Is how do you create the conditions for the team to realize that? And it really comes down to the founders and the founder and the team around her or him. And how do you make that look? You could go 10 times faster if you just, secure 10 million or 25 million, or you can raise debt. It depends what their attitude to risk is. And there's a famous saying, which is, as you probably know, it might be clever, but is it wise? And just being able to ask that question at that right moment is really important, because of course you can do whatever you can and do whatever you want, but is it wise in the long term? And the companies we've seen be very successful are the ones who really respond well to feedback. And just like they don't take it personally, they're really not offended. And they're like, yep, great point. I'll take your point on board, but I'm going to listen to someone else as well. Great, fantastic. Do whatever you need to do. But those are the ones that really become truly successful because they're not ideologically driven. They're really pragmatic, and they're very driven by the change they want to see and what they believe is right for the business, but also the world. And I really respect that a huge amount. And that's why I get so excited by the fact that some people choose to go down the route of being venture funded, and some go down the route of like, no, I just want sales. I want customers, because this is a very valid proposition and people are going to pay for this. And I have to say, it's fantastic when you have something that people want to pay for, and they want to pay big bucks for it. And it must be, I mean, for us, it's very satisfying. I mean, we have some services that we charge for, but it's very satisfying to an entrepreneur. It's a real validation. Now, to your question, are some people skewed? Yeah, I think, yeah, you definitely see companies that are chasing more funding. I think, though, recently, you have to acknowledge the fact that some companies that are applied AI driven, so a machine learning business and an artificial intelligence business probably needs more money for a longer runway before it gets the product market fit. And that's not because it's just the way things are and how they can scale. So, and that's important from a research and development perspective. You definitely need to back those pioneers that need more funding in the early stages, because if you cut that funding too early on, then it never scales. So versus an e-commerce business where you pretty much know whether you have a business or not in the first year or two. I mean, and so the funding profile does vary by sector.
What are some signs that an entrepreneur should be looking for funding? I assume like some entrepreneurs would come to TechNation, you'd observe, and at one point you said you give feedback. So when will you be giving somebody the feedback to say now is the time to get venture-backed funding?
So we're not an investor, and but what we try and do is create the conditions where through the program, they get to hear other people's views that are going through similar challenges, but also we bring in experts who have actually been through this journey before. So it's through that process that they get to really come to a point where they feel comfortable about whether they want to raise more money or not, for example. I mean, we've had a lot of success, but don't get me wrong. The other thing is we also have had CEOs step down at the end of our programs and say, you know what, I've learned that I'm not the right leader for this business. And that's a good thing because, that's failing fast in a different way and it's more productive for the business. And I know that, I know some of these businesses and these businesses are now scaling hugely. So one in particular, I won't say the name, obviously, for confidential reasons, but the person stepped down. He is now chief strategy officer. He brought in a scaling CEO, and he's smashing it, right? And I think the ability to be self-aware as a leader as to where you're driving the bus and you're thinking, oh, hold on a minute, I know myself well enough. I'm probably not. I have bigger ambitions for the business. But you know what? I'm going to do it in a different way than having to lead it 100%. And that takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of boldness. But in this instance that I'm giving in this example, he was so human about it. There's so much humility about it. He said, as a result of your program being amongst some amazing, ambitious people, they made me realize that I wasn't fundraising in the right way. I wasn't the right person to be leading this company. However, I am really good at new product development. Therefore, I'm going to focus on this as a result. And I'm just going to bring a scaling CEO who knows what to do about these difficult things that I'm not necessarily good at. I think there's I think sometimes people think that a leader knows everything, and leadership comes in different forms. It comes in, some are introverts, some are extroverts, and there's no one size fits all. That we try and kind of liberate and share as quickly as we can. Yeah.
That brings me to quite a question that pops up a lot when I see businesses scale. Do you think that at one point they can learn those skills? So you mentioned you have collaborations with Cambridge and all those business schools. So do you think, I've heard of this education called executive MBAs. So they teach you pretty much what an MBA is taught, but at an executive level. So do you think that someone like that, instead of bringing in a scaling CEO, could go through a program like that? What do you think of those programs? Can they learn, or should they just accept a different role?
So I think, what we're witnessing right now is quite unprecedented in the history of commerce and business. I think that the what I mean by that is that the speed with which a company can truly scale so quickly has never been seen before. I'll give you an example. A company called Hopin. I don't know if you know of
Yeah.
Hopin. They're virtual events business, and those guys have been going, I think, 18 months, and they're a double unicorn valued at $2 billion, and they went from a few people to over 250 people in less than 18 months. I mean, that's pretty unprecedented growth. Now, I think what leaders and scaling teams have to pay attention to is when the business is growing faster than the people in the business. And some people are really good at that, and some people need support. And I think it's just making sure that you are supporting those people through those really big leaps that are happening. And so, to your question, that's why we've put the program. You put these programs together. We're really here to facilitate that help and support, and feel like they are. We want to be a companion, because you don't have time to take a year out or 6 months out to go to, I don't know, Stanford or your local university to do a business management course. It just doesn't work that way in tech at this moment in time. And the idea behind a lot of our programs and the rationale is to just say, look, there's lots of things you don't know, and there's lots of things that you're not going to know at this point, but we're going to make you aware of what you need to think about, because here are some people who have done it before. Here are some books that you need to possibly feel like reading. Here are some people who are going through a similar situation, but they're slightly ahead of you, and this is how they cracked it. Because a lot of these people, I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs are problem solvers, and sometimes just making sure that these entrepreneurs are being supported by the right people. Now, obviously, very robust and well-oiled ecosystems have a lot of advisors and coaches, and that's great. I think that's fine, and that's a really true good sense of how, especially when you get to growth stage and you're looking to list, you need really good advice, especially from people who've done it before. But there's nothing more rewarding than hearing it from fellow entrepreneurs who are going through it with you, because it's like top of mind right now, or with someone who went through it 2 years ago and went through a lot of pain, and they want to make sure that they see another generation of people going through making the same mistakes.
I definitely get that. I think my question though is, do you think it's more if all the time was available? Do you think let's go, because right now I feel like we're dealing with an obstacle arises and an entrepreneur learns the fastest way to deal with it, which obviously is everything you're mentioning, these academies, these ecosystems, these fellow entrepreneurs peer-to-peer. But for a very long time, I felt that I've been going through these things as well, and it's very nice to deal with certain obstacles, but it doesn't really cover the main problem, which is there is no education that is wholesome for an entrepreneur. The only thing I can think of is an MBA, but I'm not even sure because I've never done an MBA. So maybe my question to you is, if we're going all the way back, a starting entrepreneur, still a student, knows he or she wants to be an entrepreneur, do you think continuing studying MBA is going to facilitate a more healthy career as an entrepreneur because they know all the facets of the business? Or do you think it's a waste of time and it's better to just deal with problems as they arise?
So probably your question is, what does the future hold for business schools, possibly, right?
I guess in some way, yes.
Look, I think what constitutes learning is really fundamental, and that's different for different people. And some people want to go at a different rate than others, and probably find the environment of academia a little bit more aligned to what they're comfortable with, and that's because of their environment, how they've been programmed, how they've been brought up, what jobs they've done. And if you're asking for advice, I mean, I think one of the best ways that I learn is by doing. So I'm a builder. I do stuff. I have to I'm hugely curious. So when I was a kid, I'd go to people's houses and I'd be looking at how their fridge worked and how their dishwasher worked. I'm just naturally curious, and and I will kind of go and do my research in an academic way, but that's my learning style, and everybody's different, and so schools and universities are very good for a certain type of person. And I think we all know that a lot of entrepreneurs, famous entrepreneurs, actually dropped out of college, dropped out of university because they didn't find it stimulating enough. And that just goes to show how I think it goes back to knowing yourself well enough to know that you can make the right choices. And in some cases, you might not make the right choice, but at least you've done something about it. I think having a bias to action, it may be the wrong decision, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But you learn from that. And I think learning from challenges, challenge-based learning is something we believe in hugely at TechNation. And you obviously don't want to repeat mistakes, but you can learn a lot from just dealing with challenges. And as I said, your attitude, it also depends on your attitude to risk. As a person, some people would probably prefer to go to business school and get all the modules learned, from strategy and operations to human resources. I think a blend of the two would be helpful, and that's what we aim to do as much as possible. Is say, look, there's stuff online you can find out, there are books you can learn, there are people you can talk to, and it's a blended learning environment. I think is what we are really excited about, because the way people learn is different. It's fast moving and it's dynamic, and new problems have to be solved every day. I'm sure you know that very well when you're an entrepreneur.
Uh, then, if we would summarize, then, from all the unicorn entrepreneurs you've seen, what do you think makes then a good entrepreneur? I've heard things like being able to be self-aware, receive feedback, being pragmatic. If you would like summarize these characteristics of people you've actually seen become successful, what is different about them compared to a normal person?
I mean, everybody's talented, right? That's I think if
There
you're
must be
asking,
some similar characteristics. When I talk to entrepreneurs, I feel like they are different people than when I talk to doctors or when I talk to lawyers. Everybody has their own characteristics, but for instance, you're not going to see me cutting people open like a doctor does. Like, that's just not me, and it's never going to happen. So clearly there are characteristics to each profession, but within entrepreneurship, I guess we've had a couple of episodes ago, we had an Olympian on. Clearly there's a difference between someone who does sports professionally and someone who eventually becomes an Olympian. So in entrepreneurship, I feel there's something similar going on. There's entrepreneurs who are doing it professionally, but then there are the unicorns. What is different about them?
I mean, I can only speak from my observations, and obviously, I think one big one is focus, and just the determination to just focus on what's important. There's always a lot of noise when you're running a business. And how do you make sure that you and the team, you and your co-founders are just focusing on the signal each time? And that takes discipline. And self-management is the best form of management, really. And so being able to, I've seen definitely that, the
Can you
ability
give
to.
examples? A lot of people say focus, but can you give an actual example? Because I can probably every entrepreneur says they're focusing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of one in particular, and uh, they're a fintech business, and they're in the lending space, and they had an opportunity to go into the credit card business and just really be, that was a very attractive proposition. And he, in that particular instance, just said, no, we're going to stick to what we do really, really well, and we're going to fix lending, and not go into other financial services products just because they're more profitable. I mean, that's just one example of how you make those tough choices and those tough decisions, when it's so obvious on paper that something is more profitable than what you're doing at the core. So I think this is where mission-based, mission-driven organizations that have a strong purpose not only are become more successful because of the people they attract, but because the leading team or the founding team or the founder is so, I guess, is open and honest and authentic and unashamedly about what the business is going to do and what it's not going to do. And so that takes a lot of knowing oneself, being able to know that your judgment is good, that you're being advised correctly, a lot of self-presence, a lot of inner ability to ask good questions of yourself and just come out strongly, not arrogantly, not overconfidently, just quietly confident about the fact that this is the business, this is the direction we're going. That would be another observation. And as I said, yeah, the feedback point is all well and good, and sometimes you do see people, the ones who have been successful, have been good communicators. I have to say, there are different, you're asking a very good question, but I have to say that in other instances, the founder has been a very good communicator and has delegated hugely to people who he trusts. And in the one instance that I'm thinking about, in other areas, I know one other business that's going very well. She works really tightly with the team. So there are different traits. I really do believe that there are different traits, and it does come down to spending enough time. I think one thing that connects is that, and you ask these questions and they sort of say, well, I've spent enough time with myself to know what I'm really good at and what I'm not really good at. And I just make sure that I make sure that that's covered off. And that's having that honesty with oneself and the people around you is so powerful, I think.
How do you learn that? These are traits I feel like they're either nurtured, the environment has given it, maybe a good mentor. Are there universities you can go to learn these skills, like focusing, being an entrepreneur that is mission driven? Are these like curriculums they teach you in business school or something?
I think typically business schools have done a very good job to date of, I did an MBA, but that was 20 years ago, and they do a very good job of teaching you the modules and the frameworks and the tools and the techniques, and that's very valuable.
So where do you learn it then?
But that's the rational part. I think the emotional part is the bit that I think there's more and more studies coming out on the emotional part of being a human, being a leader, and also the sacrifices. That's the one thing that people don't talk about enough, I guess, is the sacrifices that you have to make as a business leader, as a, running a company. And sometimes it takes its toll. And it's in those moments, in those desperate moments, that you learn the fastest. And you have to surround yourself. You have to be very aware early on that you have to surround yourself. And sometimes it just happens, right? You stumble into these mistakes and you learn from these mistakes, but you just make sure that you don't happen again. But being surrounded by people who can really help you out and go, yeah, I know what you're going through. I've seen this before. You're about to hear burnout, and I can tell you why, because these are the symptoms, and da da da. And it's like, wow, I wasn't aware of that, because you don't know what you don't know unless someone tells you and gives you that honest feedback. I think really surrounding yourself by advisors and coaches, not too many, just the right ones who really understand you. And that takes time. I mean, investing that time is really important up front, because you want to get that right before you then start to scale pretty significantly. And because you don't have much time then to make corrections. And as you can imagine, small mistakes when you're growing fast at the growth stage can multiply quite quickly and amplify quite quickly.
So pretty much before that 20 people mark, you should have set up your advisory board, coaches, the people around you, so that when you start hitting real growth, things don't fall apart.
I mean, look, I mean, it depends, right? I mean, I know that's that's not the right answer to say, but it really does depend. It could be, it depends on the stamina of the leader and the co-founding team. It depends on how much money you have at that point, because it's all very well saying these things, but the priorities are kind of securing customers and securing revenue so I can pay my people and that kind of thing. That's what goes through a lot of people's minds. And you're fighting fires every day, and you're thinking the last thing that probably someone wants to advise you on is, oh, by the way, there's a self-awareness course you should do. It's just not going to work for some people, and I completely understand that. I think it happens through things moving through, you're going through different cycles, and then big things happen, and you think, okay, let's not make sure that doesn't happen again, and let's put a more robust thing in place. And but if you're being, there's no set rule at 20 people, at 50 people, 100 people. It really varies. It really varies, and I really am not one of these people that says that these are the rules. It's being mindful of the fact of what's worked for other teams and other people. Is great to take best practice from that and then apply it to your business, because it might be in a different sector that has different dynamic challenges, different environments, and especially if it's a regulated environment, like financial services, the pressures are different on the scaling leadership team than another space which is not regulated, and that plays into the board that you put together and how they look at risk or opportunity. But that's why at some point it does really matter not only which investor you get to choose that really gets you as a business, but also the kind of coaches and advisors that you put around you. And sometimes you just get caught up in the moment, and you just go along with things, and then you find out that actually that probably wasn't the best decision back then 6 months ago. But having the confidence and the self-knowledge that you can correct these things before they blow up because you've talked to someone else that went through something similar is so helpful. And that saves 6 months of time. That saves 6 months of pain or 6 months of discussion. And I know it's easy for me to say these things, but we've certainly gone through those ourselves in a different way, because we're partially government backed, in the sense we're an independent organization, but we're government backed in the sense that we've secured money from government to deliver impact and an ROI of X amount. So that brings nuances along with it.
How do you keep talking about these advisors and coaches, and I've actually a couple of episodes ago, like now a couple of months ago, we had Nicholas from the CEO from Blinkist, a Berlin based startup.
Great company.
And he talked about getting an executive coach. Since then, I've gotten one myself. I definitely like it. He's actually coming on the podcast as well. But my question to you is, how do you keep talking about this, and this is what a lot of these unicorn startups do. How do you find these advisors? What do you look for? How do you know it's going to be a good one? Because in the process, for instance, I've gotten an executive coach, but I've gotten multiple coaches, and some of them it didn't work out. So what should I or other people be looking for when they're looking for these advisors or coaches or even investors?
I mean, in some instances, look, and for some people, it appears on their radar because they've made so many mistakes, right? And in other instances, you're advised correctly before things happen, and it's very different for everybody, right? But it's putting yourself out there and taking risk, and that's what those are symptoms of a great entrepreneur, is just bias for action. Let's do this, and then finding out that it didn't quite work as it should have done, and maybe we should have been advised differently. And I've seen that, and great learnings have been had from history, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as they say, and that is so true in entrepreneurship, and that's why we see serial entrepreneurs emerge, and you can see that they raise faster the second time around, the third time around, they're raising faster. They're able to know what how to be a great team in front of the investor, or and that just they just get to the things a lot faster, and problem solve a lot faster. But there are networks. It's always great to ask, and in fact, just having a mentor, actually approaching people and saying, look, you built your business. How about I'm looking for a mentor. They can only say no. That's the worst thing they can say, is say no. But that has worked for me in the past, even when I was in bigger companies myself, and big companies like when I was at Orange, and reaching out to really kind of respectful executives who had done amazing things, and reaching out to them and within the business and saying, look, would you consider being a mentor for me, and because I really respect what you're doing and what you're building. And it started from there. That was my recognition. That was about 15 years ago, when I started recognizing that actually learning from people who had gone through those things was super helpful for me at the time.
So you just approach a person. Did you talk to this executive before? Did you have a relationship, or was it just, hey, you built something cool, do you want to mentor me?
No, I mean, in that specific instance, we only came across each other in executive committee meetings and investment committee meetings, where he was the chief financial officer, and in another instance, they were the chief commercial officer, where I was pitching for investment into a mobile music product at the time in 2005. So a little while ago, and they were really challenging me and the team about the product and how it was going to scale, and I just came out of that meeting and thought, actually, there's a lot I don't know, and I'm gonna find a way of getting to know this stuff, and I'm just gonna reach out to him in that instance, and um, yeah, so that's very. I mean, again, I don't know how. Learning, what constitutes learning is different for different people, and being able to recognize that is been super helpful for me. When I go to a city, I love meeting the people from the city, whereas my wife likes to read about it before, gets the guidebooks, and just plans a few things. That's my wife. I mean, that's what makes her happy and comfortable. For me, I'm like, let's get in there. Let's just let's go out and meet some local people. that's and you learn from that. And so I think recognizing that in oneself, and actually taking the time to reflect that, and recognizing the gaps that you may have, and then thinking, okay, do I go to a mentoring platform? Do I reach out to someone else who started a business because they may know someone who they recommend? And as you can imagine, a lot of this is network based, and yeah, that's certainly the case.
Do you feel it's better to pay a mentor or not? Because then they are more focused on you, more involved, and is their advice then better?
I've not heard of that, and I personally, at least for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable paying a mentor, because I think for me, it's a relationship. I think, and a relationship means that it's it's give and take, obviously, but it's give on both sides. And what that also means is, and I'm sure your audiences will probably be familiar with this, which is the mentor and the mentee, and there's reverse mentorship, which is the mentor gets mentored by the mentee as well, especially if there's a generational gap. I think we're always, we should, well, look, from my perspective, I'd like to know that I'm always going to be a student, and I'm always going to be learning. And there's a lot I can learn from younger people. And just because I went through so far 20 years of digital technology executive management roles doesn't mean there's a lot I don't know, and that will continue to be the case until I die. So I would not recommend paying a mentor.
And then I wanted to cover this as well. So there's been a huge trend in the States. So we've been trying to scale to the States for a while. One of the trend I kept seeing, which completely baffled me compared to Europe, is advisors and mentors in America, in order to be involved, want some percentage. And apparently, the common thing there is about 1 to 2% of a company. Have you heard of this trend? What do you think about it? Do you think it's good to give a percentage to an advisor?
Ooh, I think what I've seen though is certainly venture funding deals. I
Yes.
think there's two. Well, I wouldn't call it a trend. I would just say two observations that I've noted in the last 2 or 3 years. One is where venture funding comes with support services. So venture funds are very much aware, the proliferation of venture funds in the UK has been staggering in the last few years. And what venture funds are understanding is that money alone is not enough, and meaning, it has to be smart money. It's money that has benefits, and one of those benefits could be being able to have access to a chief talent officer who can help you hire the best people that they know at scale and at speed, which is kind of critical. Versus another situation where um, in fact, the money comes with the condition that the scaling leadership team brings on a coach, just to make sure that they can be as productive as possible as a team, especially if that person, he or she, has experience in scaling teams. And but I mean, it's no different to a board member coming in and taking 0.25% at a certain stage of your business to help you kind of with a certain shortage of skill that you may have at your executive leadership team. And there's, that's just it's just an evolution. Um,
I had a question that I wanted to ask all the way at the beginning, but uh, let's circle back to you were talking about the academy, a lot of startups, the 50 startup scale ups that you support. Um, Obviously, we're now in January. Brexit just happened. How does that affect especially scale ups and what you guys do?
so yes, so the Brexit vote happened in 2016. The UK followed through on that result, and we're now coming up to 5 years since that happened. And
But now it's actually
yes,
Brexit.
that's right. So now we've actually left the union, and I would say that investment in the UK has been continuing to increase, and I know that definitely for certain deals that I've seen, Brexit has been baked into the valuation of the business, and that has not
But
deterred.
do you feel it's harder now for scaling entrepreneurs to go outside the EU?
Oh, oh, um, no, I don't.
Oh, sorry, not outside the EU, from the UK to the EU, and yeah, the other way around as well, from scaling entrepreneurs from the EU to the UK.
No, I don't actually. What I see, I mean, I think the tech sector, the UK tech sector, was very much in favor of staying in the EU, but now, obviously, as things stand, it has to make the best of what the situation is. And I always find, even since the vote happened in 2016, I really saw a lot of entrepreneurs rise to the challenge of how to deal with that bit of a road bump at the time. They definitely didn't see it as a roadblock at all. In fact, it was like, okay, this is how do we make this work for us? And I think there's a lot of good thinking going on about how do you increase agility between government policy and what entrepreneurs need, and to make sure that that conduit is as has very fast feedback loops. But I think, to your question, I think I've certainly seen entrepreneurs think not only about the EU, but also having higher aspirations in entering places like India, which they didn't have necessarily before. So it's really upped some of entrepreneurs that I've spoken to up their game and said, look, we're going to go for India, which is unusual for us, but we're going to go for it. And so it's kind of, for some people, it has increased their ambitions because of the situation and circumstances that we might be in or we might think we're in. But I guess it's in the future really of the of the sector is in its hands. And I, as I said, another record high last year of investment, over $15 billion, which is staggering, and that was more than the whole of Europe put together. So I think talent is important. I think investment is important. I think political leadership is important, and I think infrastructure is important. Just what you put around entrepreneurs to help them succeed are really the key constituents and the key enablers of success. And I think we're about to enter a golden age of IPOs in the UK this year, I believe. And that's really good news, because obviously when these liquidity events happen, it's not just the founder or the founding team that becomes wealthy. It's just hundreds of people who then become seed investors, who then are very close to their networks and investing in the next generation of entrepreneurs. And that is a key success factor for any ecosystem. The UK today has over 82 unicorns. Over the last sort of 20 years or so, we've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have worked with 26% of those so far. But what we're seeing is these people really kind of looking for listings, looking for liquidities, looking for acquisitions, and then you see cohorts of people just becoming seed investors, which is a very positive thing for any ecosystem to become more robust and more diverse, frankly.
How do you feel about your daily operations and Brexit? Do you feel like the relationships you've had all over the world, because I'm assuming you're also connected to the other ecosystems, has it affected anything? Do you feel like you can still continue collaborating? And what are some notable collaborations that you have? Do you collaborate, for instance, with the Netherlands?
So, Brexit is, for some companies, it has been a positive for sure, and for others, it's probably been slightly more challenging, especially if you were not prepared for it, I guess. But I've seen, overall, I would say we're building bridges with all. We know Startup Leap.nl, La French Tech, and I think it's what's great to see is European technology ecosystem as a whole thriving like never before, and that's so positive, because I think what's great for the EU is great for the UK. What's great for the UK is great for the EU and as a whole. And I think we need to see a lot more technology companies in Europe as a whole, because at the moment, I think it's fair to say that we have a slight skew towards either American companies or Chinese companies.
Yeah, correct.
And I think Brexit or no Brexit, I think we just need more European companies generally, whether they're based in the UK or France or Netherlands. Let's just see more of that. And because honestly, I think there's going to be an explosion of innovation and creativity post this pandemic, which is clearly a humanitarian crisis at the moment. But we're going to have to think differently regardless, because of the pandemic. The pandemic is creating a new norm. It's accelerated so many things, bad and good and bad. And that's the way, that's entrepreneurship. Every crisis instigates an entrepreneurial boom. That was the case in the financial crisis. Fintech, the UK and London in particular, is a fintech crown. And it's only second to New York in terms of the number of fintechs that have been created here, in terms of valuations too. And that's only partly because of the financial crisis in 2008.
That's actually something I wanted to ask. So it's great that you bring it up, but how has the pandemic affected all of these things that you are doing? Because you have a specific network and ecosystem where you said that entrepreneur from Tesco, he started meeting people and doing stuff, but that all goes away with the pandemic. So how have you guys been facilitating new entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I mean, so we had to we adapted pretty quickly. Really proud of the team. They did a fantastic job because I think some of our program, in fact, at the time, all our programs were partly face to face, and clearly that human connection is so important. But we pivoted and made everything online after the pandemic, and we went into the first lockdown. But I have to say, it's been fantastic. The number of webinars we've put together, and we've been able to share a lot more information and a lot more knowledge a lot quicker, and which makes it a lot more productive. So yes, we have we have an office in Manchester and an office in London, and before the pandemic we had and we have entrepreneur engagement managers in every part of the UK. But the leases were up on our offices, and actually we've given up our London and Manchester offices, and now we've gone fully remote for the next until the end of October 2021. And actually, as a result of doing the programs online, we've seen attendance from all over the UK a lot higher. And in fact, our events, we used to be quite UK centric. And the last event that we did on climate change and net zero, attracting as many founders as we could on net zero. And we had people from over 45 countries join our online event. So that was really kind of fantastic and kind of really exhilarating. So we've just adapted, Levi. We just adapted, and just being curious and open to how you can reimagine things. And yes, to some extent, if you're starting a business now, you have pluses and minuses. There's so much more available in terms of resources than ever before about starting a business. It's 10 times cheaper. You can launch it 10 times faster because of all the resources. But we're also noticing the fact that a lot of CEOs and a lot of leadership teams are actually hiring people from all over the world as well. And they're not necessarily just hiring within that local geography. So it's a great opportunity, not just for cities, but also for anybody, anywhere. Just knowing which networks to go. You can find out so much from the internet itself. It's such a powerful enabling tool that our vision is we believe in a world where anybody who's got the drive can become a successful game-changing leader and company. And that enablement through the internet is so powerful in that regard.
But you still have the lack of networking. Then how does that entrepreneur guy from Tesco talk to people?
They just apply. I mean, they just apply themselves, but also secure their. They came through. They applied to Founders Network. They got accepted, and that's just making yourself available and just applying yourself to different networks is one of the most productive way.
But I mean, during the pandemic, they can't network. So how do you?
Oh, it's online networks. Online networks.
Oh, online networks.
Yeah. Online networks. I mean, a lot of our stuff now is on. I mean, all of it now is online at the moment.
So what can I imagine? A forum, a Facebook group?
Yeah, forum and a Slack forum. In the case of Founders Network, for our alum, we have a dedicated application. When you finish when you're on the program and when you complete the program and become an alum, you're part of our Knowledge Insights Network app. We call KIN, and that's where we are sharing. That's where we are posting. Questions are being posted, and people are joining online and learning from each other. But it's all online.
How many members are in that Slack?
So in the Founders Network, we have over 3,000 now. Yeah.
And these are all people that went.
All startups. And then in the kin, we have over 700 companies that have gone through our programs so far.
Wow. A great question that I wanted to ask, because you kind of touched it. Until October, you don't have any offices. After everything you've experienced, how are you going to go forward? Obviously, we're doing a little bit similar stuff, except we're more on the ecosystem community building part. Obviously, not government backed or anything, but so for us, the future very much looks like the virtual part and a little bit of physical part as well. But our team heavily is inclined towards the virtual part. So, how is your future looking like after October? Are offices going to be a thing for you? How do you want to handle after October?
So what we said was we announced the policy change in November, and what we said is in the meantime, whilst we go remote first, we will enable you to have a pass to any of your, so that you can have access to a local co-working space. And that gives you, if you want to meet up with team members, if you're allowed to, given the restrictions,
Exactly. Yeah.
you're able to do that. So it's a blended policy, meaning that there's no dedicated place, but if you want to go to a local co-working space and meet with your team, you can do so. We also said that company workshops would be face-to-face quarterly, but clearly right now we're in lockdown. We're in another lockdown right now. This is our third lockdown at the moment. That's not going to be the case. But I think coming up to November, it's a question that I think a lot of people are asking themselves. I think it will be a blended solution, frankly.
But inclined towards a certain thing, do you think?
I think what I mean by blended, I think we survey our employees quite regularly just to make sure that we're being very data driven in our decision making. And I think only one person wanted to be in the office 5 days a week physically. So so I think I I think there's something really special about human to human connection, and being face to face that cannot be replicated over a Zoom call. In fact, even now, recently, we've instigated a way in which we don't have videos like cameras on, but we actively listen and just actively have just an audio conference call. Because working from home for sustained periods of time isn't necessarily normal and shouldn't probably be fully encouraged, if I'm honest, at the moment. That's the way I see things. We, as a result, have instigated a number of support for our employees, really invested a lot more into learning and development. But I do believe it will be a blend. Maybe 2 days a week in the office, 3 days out the office, maybe split by team. But this is all to work out when we kind of come out the other side, so to speak.
That's actually something you're touching on again. You're just leading these questions at this point, but you have a very unique perspective that is very global due to you being a member of World Economic Forum. What do you think about all these lockdowns and how they will affect business, how they're affecting employees and everything? What's your perspective on it? And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the sector you're in, and I think for us in the technology space, I think we can probably safely say that we're knowledge workers. And when you look into the research, the difference between an average knowledge worker and the best knowledge worker is 10x. That means that there is a lot of scope and space for you to be able to be the best that you can be at your job, and there are things you need to think about in that regard, from your environment to your habits and the power of habits and your self-management techniques, versus a manual worker, where the difference between an average manual worker and the best manual worker is 2x, because you're limited by the tools, you're limited by certain things. And that just goes to show how much scope there is in understanding what constitutes the best productivity for knowledge workers. So to your question, yeah, I've had the privilege of being able to have worked and lived in New York and in Paris, and I think different cultures may respond differently to the lockdown and the pandemic. I do believe, though, as a human race, we're building up some new skills as a result of this, and being able to deal with pain that we're not used to. And that can only be I mean, we have to try hard to make sure that we see the good side of this thing, whilst also making sure that we're acknowledging that not everybody is as lucky as other people, and that we should always reach out to anybody who might need our help. But I think I'm certainly, I think companies are certainly, as I said, I think I've seen two types of companies where they've adapted really well to the pandemic, and there are other companies where the leadership team feel like they've lost control. uh, that's been my observation, and that tells you a little bit about perhaps where the company may need to what things the company may need to focus on in because one of the biggest, I mean, one of the biggest constituents in a productive leadership team, or any team, frankly, is trust, right? And if you don't have that, and if you don't have those difficult conversations, then the pandemic can make you put you in a very difficult position.
Are there specific topics that startups you deal with scale ups? Are there very common topics that always get asked that are extremely relevant, maybe also to this audience?
So we have a course on our Digital Business Academy, which is by far the most popular, which is, do I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? And
what do you cover there? What are some topics?
That's a good question. We basically just, do you have the grit, the determination, the mental fitness, and the emotional fitness to be able to deal with setbacks when they hit you, things like that. So there's the emotional side as well as the commercial side, or the rational side, I say, which is, do you have a business plan? Are you sure that the market is as big as you say it is? Have you done enough research? Have you tested it with enough customers? And if you're answering yes to a lot of those questions, then you probably have what it takes, and how you think as a person. That's definitely by far one of our most popular courses. And then we break it down in terms of people support, like digital marketing, what metrics you should track. But so your question, Lova, was
the most common relevant things for our audience that people tend to ask.
You mean in the programs themselves? You mean sort of?
Yeah. I can imagine scale-ups are asking probably specific questions that are very relevant, that get brought up a lot. Startups have different questions, like essential questions, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are very, very niche and targeted. Like, do I have my chief data officer reporting to my CTO? Is data cross-functional, or is it kind of integrated? We have questions like, when do I hire my first board member? Do I need to hire a chair? Do I need to hire a chief operating officer?
You brought those up at the beginning. Could you actually answer those questions? Because they're very relevant, I think.
I think the latest one actually at the moment is, do I need a chief of staff? That's been the latest trend. Again, that's why being in the zone with other people and trying to understand where your company is at. And, for example, do you find yourself being pulled into lots of human resources conversations? That either means that, if the answer is yes, that means that, and you're at 50 people, that means that either you shouldn't be. That's a great, you shouldn't be necessarily. And again, it depends on lots of factors, but because, you need to make sure that you're focusing on growth, and that things like that should be left to either the HR person or the COO, for example. Because at that point, when you're really truly scaling, you need less dramas and more action and focus. The dramas tend to happen quite early on in a business, I guess I would say, because you're trying to work out what is your product market fit, and then it's really just focusing in on execution. That is really and also the rapid feedback loops that you put in place as part of your processes. and how do you decipher and break down what it is that your business needs to do in order to just keep on growing, and also your customer life cycle and your customer lifetime value and the calculations that you put against that. I mean, I'm partly speaking from from companies I know, and I'm partly speaking from our perspective as well. We're partially government funded, so our metrics are slightly, we have KPIs, we have metrics, but we also have to think about impact, as you can imagine. And this is one of the issues that I think NGOs have to some extent. Not that we're saying we're comparing ourselves to NGOs, but NGOs that are non-profit. We are at this point non-profit, and therefore the metrics and the conditions that drive your results are slightly different. However, I think that increasingly companies, given with climate change and the climate challenge that we have, companies are going to be encouraged to start reporting on their external costs, meaning that you obviously always report on your revenues and your profits, but I think you'll have to increasingly report on what is the external costs that your company is affecting. But yeah, I've gone off a little bit off piece, but hopefully that answers your question.
No, yeah, I definitely like that. So in short, what I catch out of that is if you're having too many conversations about a certain topic, you probably should be hiring someone to deal with that.
Yeah, and especially if you're not good at it, especially if you don't like it, especially if you don't enjoy it. I mean, some founders and CEOs are very good people managers, and that's right. I mean, but I can't encourage you enough to take it to read some of those great books. I mean, the Great Growth Handbook is another one. Upscale is the one we've produced, which is written by 25 entrepreneurs who have actually been on their journeys themselves. So we didn't write it ourselves. We actually just interviewed 25 entrepreneurs who built or backed, big businesses and shared what they thought was important. I mean, for example, bad hires, you need to let go. You need to let go sooner rather than later, just because they manifest things that that your company may not be comfortable with, and it could be very detrimental to your business. These are the hard conversations. As I said, people, strategy, and fundraising are the things that people need to keep in mind, and especially the early stages.
I have a very specific question that got brought up in the team as well. How do you move to London? Let's say a business, or does a person that doesn't have a business, just somebody from the European Union, how do they move to London, start a business? Well, I would say two scenarios. One doesn't have a business, wants to move to London, start a business. One has a business, wants to move to London and start a business. How do they go about doing it? Which website do they visit? Who do they contact? How do they start networking?
Yeah, and that's so. And we've seen that, and we've also seen it for a developer as well, how they move through the stages to become a top-notch developer in the UK as well. And so there are two things. One is obviously your citizenship and what that is, whether you need a visa or not. So take a look at TechNation.io. There is a whole rundown on our visa scheme. And that's actually for founders or for someone who wants to work in the UK, and it's on their terms, which is fantastic, right? It's for 5 years. So let's say you're a fantastic expert in light editing and AR visual technology, and you can prove that through references that you have, which is really niche. You yourself can come in with your family for 5 years, and you can either start your own business, or you can join a business that needs that skill. So it's on your terms. And that's so super empowering for me and for people, for the people that have come through that route. So that's the route we manage, but there are other visa routes, and you can come in as a student, go to university here, and then should you decide to do when you leave or graduate, should you want your PhD, do your PhD, you can do your PhD. And then actually after that, you can actually have up to 2 years, once you finish your PhD, actually work in a UK company for up to 2 years, in which time you can then apply to another route where the company sponsors you to be a person that can work in the UK with that company, and that's called tier 2. So you come in on
Wait,
tier
is that
4.
is that only for PhDs or
No,
also for
no, it's
master
just for no
students?
anybody. Yeah, I was just giving you an example, especially with AI companies at the moment. But let's say you come in on tier 4 as a student visa. You have then 2 years of being able to work here in the UK. Then you go through tier 2, which gives you the ability to work with this UK company for infinite time until the company keeps going, and then you can apply for citizenship, and then obviously, or you can go through tier 1. So just to answer your question, it's we've made it as easy as possible on our website for you to look through the documentation, also the eligibility, and also we connect you with other people that have gone through the process themselves. And as I said, a third of our applicants are founders themselves. There are other visa routes like startup visa routes, innovator routes. So if you're an innovator that wants to start a company as well, you can go through that route as well. You can be an investor as well. There are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to be an investor to come in and set up in the UK and invest in companies. And then it's about really just once you get granted, so you get endorsed by us. If you're going through tier 1, you get endorsed by us, and then you get obviously there are security checks by the Home Office like any other country, and then you get granted the visa, and then you can move here, or for up to 5 years. And
Yeah, sure.
the one change that we did see that we were kind of really keen to see, which we did a few years ago, which was, we see a lot of companies when they're growing and innovating, they need to make talent hires or talent acquisitions. So they just find a company like in South Africa or somewhere else where there's up to a team of 5 with a very specialist feature that they've built that this company needs. And with this tier 1, they can actually make the acquisition of the business and bring up to 5 people into the UK. And that's like a really important thing for scaling companies and their needs when they're needing to innovate.
That kind of brings me to kind of getting a full picture of what you guys are doing. I'm wondering, how did you get involved? Because when I started looking into you, you have a very corporate background. I saw you worked at BlackBerry, among others, very meta, World Economic Forum. How did you get involved in TechNation? Why would you even get involved into something like that? Could you maybe tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, so I read engineering as my first degree, and I've always been interested in the crossover of science and art and the arts. And actually, my first foray into work was the music business, and I did everything from artist management to artist promotions, and then became a music journalist, reporting on the impact of the internet on the music business in the late 1990s. And so,
Really? That's
yeah,
amazing.
so and I got an early sort of front row seat of what impact the internet was going to have on everything, and reporting on it was a fantastic role. And then did an MBA because I left the music business, um, and then went into Orange. But Orange it's a mobile network at the time, and it was a fantastic time to be there because, if you may remember, Europe was very far ahead in mobile technology at the time, and even the first music mobile phone was in Europe, way before the iPhone came out, and this was sort of in early 2003, 4, and at the
I think we
time.
had Floris van der Kloshorst. He actually managed that part for Nokia back in those times. He talked about that journey and how he like got a lot of these big artists from the States sign up and all these big labels. But sorry, continue. Yeah, I
No,
remember
no,
that
no, it's good.
story.
I mean, I remember sort of, not only did I have the privilege of working on the first smartphone in the world with Microsoft at the time. It was a fantastic sort of partnership between Orange and Microsoft to bring out the first smartphone. But it was also a time when we were testing the notion of a music community on a mobile. a bit like, prior to Facebook, prior to MySpace. So I think what drove me along was always being intentional in the sense that I have a real thirst for innovation. So even I worked even in the time that I was in bigger companies, I've always been the startup champion, and I've taken big chances on backing these startups, and meaning that I would buy their services and make sure that we would integrate their services. That certainly was the case for video services, the case for music services, and I did the Facebook deal with Orange for over 12 countries back in 2006, and so I was
What
very
was the Facebook deal?
just bringing Facebook on mobile, just making it accessible, and zero rate tariffs and things like that. It shows. Also, I've always had a thirst for innovation and being at the cutting edge, having a front row seat of the next wave of change. And then I went into the app space in 2009 in New York, and then joined Nokia at the time, and then went into venture capital for a little bit with Nokia Growth Partners, which are doing fantastically well now. And then, yeah, I had a very, very short stint at BlackBerry, and I had just started out in New York, and then I got a call saying, are you interested in this thing called Tech City that's growing in London? And at the time I was working out of New York, and I had noticed that the UK was onto a fantastic sort of growth path of fueling the growth of startups. And so I was paying attention. I definitely was very interested in it. So I was very lucky in that regard I think I would say that I've always had a passion for building things and innovation. And as I was saying earlier to you, I'm hugely curious. So being able to kind of make sense out of what's in front of you and creating the future has always excited me.
If you'd have the opportunity to do something with music, would you do it right now? Seems like the bug is still there.
Oh, music is something that's emotive, and that's a great question. I love meeting people who are very passionate about music and technology, but I leave it to them. I think I've learned not to dabble in that regard too much. But I'm definitely I think music was one of the first industries to be amazingly hit by the internet, and it was just really, as I look back, hugely privileged at the time to be able to talk to those people at the time and what was happening, and I was trying to report as much as I could about what the future held. And then it went mobile as well. So and now I think, right now we're probably living through the slowest rate of our time, and things are just going to get faster and faster. And how do we adapt as humans is a great question to ask.
Nice. We're slowly starting to wrap up, and we have some final questions that we always ask. The first is a crash and burn segment that we call, which is what are some of the biggest failures that you didn't expect in your career, and what did you learn from it?
So yeah, that's a great question. But I think the one that comes to mind is signing a deal with the Chemical Brothers to be the first video on an SD card on a mobile phone, and I only signed up the recording rights. I didn't sign up the publishing rights, so I had to actually go back and, and actually talk really charmingly to the manager at the time about the fact that we really wanted a good deal here, and certainly my manager at the time wasn't exactly hugely impressed by my entrepreneurial stream at the time, because obviously we had to pay a little bit more than we had anticipated. That was definitely, I guess, and how to ask for help at the time was probably a big learning curve for me.
What is another question related to obviously the name of our podcast, but what is the project you worked on that had the biggest impact? And biggest impact would be whatever in whichever career you've worked on.
Wow. I'd like to think the one I'm working on right now, I think it's we as a team are doing everything we can to contribute whatever we can to make sure that these companies and these people are as successful as they can be. And I think we certainly are measuring our impact by being on track to deliver $1 billion to the UK economy in that regard. But I think it's also the moments that we've created as a result of our facilitation for people to make them realize how they could be even better as leaders. Certainly resonates with me a lot. And I think that need to be helpful in that regard is very important to me and the team for sure.
Maybe completely unrelated then, outside of everything, what are you currently doing or learning that has nothing to do with your business?
I think at the moment, like probably a few people I know, I'm really learning about the power of habits and reprogramming oneself as much as one can. And that's pretty much, I think, been fueled by the pandemic. Sort of making so many changes to what it means to being able to take care of oneself and being kind as much as possible, no matter how difficult the circumstances are. And so that's definitely, I mean, it's related. I think the world of work and the world of personal and play are kind of blending at the moment, like in ways which we've never seen before. And certainly being mindful of that and how to be sort of attuned to that is important. But I think I certainly that's a good question. I'm reading a lot more. I'm paying attention to how much caffeine I'm drinking. I'm paying attention to my sleep. So it's not ready to work, but I know it probably has a compound effect on work. And
what are you learning from those things that you're reading?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with an Aura ring. I bought an Aura ring.
Yeah, I have one as well. I bought it when it I think I was one of the first 100 who bought it at the Kickstarter.
I'm not encouraging consumerism here at all, but I think I think it's been great in making me aware of what to pay attention to with your sleep. I think we spend a third of our lives sleeping, so just being more mindful of that, and it also gently nudges, like it's time to move your feet a little bit, or you move your legs a little bit, and it's time for bed. It gives you a nudge about it's time for bed, things like that. That a lot of your audiences probably think like, what is that about? But I think it's just, how do you sort of change? How do you evolve? How do you continue evolving? Because I was kind of saying this to you earlier. I do my best at trying to stay as a student. I'm always learning. The thirst for self-learning is quite big. Always been with me and a lot of the friends I know. And so, but you don't want to get too obsessive about it. But I think just the notion of being able to drink a pint of water before you start your day, I think, apparently there are lots of positives with that. There are lots of positives with making sure that even though you're working from home, going out before you start your day, and then when you finish your day, going out again and doing another round of walking. These are small things that I think have a compound effect, I think. What else is your question? I think I think this is actually, I think, speaks volumes, I guess, to what we've been talking about throughout this podcast, which is paying attention to oneself when you're constantly dealing with fires, and make sure that you are the best person that you can be to your team, and making sure that you're putting enough time into knowing how best to deal with certain circumstances and demands. So it sounds obvious. It really sounds obvious, but it's amazing how much this comes up in our sessions, or at least in the program sessions, just how much people are, when you're an entrepreneur, you're fixing, you're solving, and you just don't have that time necessarily to slow down and actually reflect. And I think that's something that is being definitely encouraged in our ecosystem because it has longer term positives. You've probably heard the term, slow down to go fast.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Maybe a good, actually, final question. This is what our audience tends to request a lot. Are there any books you're reading you'd recommend?
Uh,
Or books that have helped your career throughout time?
Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. That's a nice novel.
What is it about, and what did you learn from it?
Well, about living in New York and how people are humans, and humans are humans, and then you have to be very aware of 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 not thinking that what you believe is to be true is 100% reality. And how do you sort of develop a way in which you think, hang on a minute, life isn't the same for everybody, that life is extremely different for everybody, and how do you fit into that and play your part in the best way possible. What other books? Capitalism Without Capital. That's a good one. That's a good one I would recommend.
What did you learn from that one?
Just how important it is for us to continue evolving our thinking about what system we've built around us. And I think there's a lot more coming out about this during the pandemic, which is how do you make sure that we reward people correctly for the jobs that they do, from nurses to doctors, who really have such a huge value in society that may have been overlooked in certain cases. Another book I actually just remembered, Principles by
Ray Dalio.
Ray Dalio, yes. That definitely impacted me in a good way a couple of years ago when going through a kind of a key challenge, and just how important principles are in setting boundaries. You've really now got me thinking about, because I love books, and I actually, funny enough, last night was using my Notion app to put down some of the best books I've ever read, and now I've gone blank. And I didn't realize you were going to ask me the question at all. I was just like, I really ought to put a list together of the best books I've read. So there you go.
Maybe you can send it over later and we'll put it in the description of the podcast.
Cool.
But no, that sounds good. I love Principles by Ray Dalio as well. He has some good interviews as well online. But I think that's a great way to close, actually. I want to roll out the red carpet for you. Tell the people anything, whatever is happening, where they can find you. Take it away.
Brilliant. By the way, I've just remembered, I just finished actually Stealing Fire, by the way, by Jamie Wheel. That's a great book. And two other books that have just come to me is The Road Less Traveled.
Oh, that one is good.
Yeah, and the other one was The Fountainhead. I don't know if you've read that one.
No.
And then the other one was The Second Curve by Charles Handy, about how do you sort of contribute your life's work. How do you make it matter? How do you measure how it matters to the world? So you can. So it's been fun having you ask all these great questions. You can find me on Twitter mainly at Gerard Grech, GerardGrech, and obviously find us online. It's at TechNation.io, and do follow us at TechNation on Twitter. We're also on YouTube. We're also on Instagram, and so do reach out if you're thinking about possibly starting or growing a business in the UK. But even if you're not, just we share a lot of information for free. Our reports are really informative. We take very much a global look and a European look as well. So we're very much into making sure that we're kind of as inclusive as possible with our work. So yeah, do take a look. We've got tons of blogs that we've written on various things. Some of the questions that you've been asking yourself, how do we define tech? When is the right time to hire X, Y, Z? And I think, hopefully that's be useful. But if, do feedback, we've built everything through feedback. That's how we continue doing our work. So yeah.
I loved the interview, learned a ton of specific things as well, and especially how to move to London. So I really enjoyed it. I hope to see you maybe on a next episode as well. But thank you so much for coming, and yeah, see you on the next one.
Well, Lova, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your business. It's great to see you grow and the way that you are, and all the best with the next chapter of your growth.
If you liked this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to any business question